Hey, I'm Lucas Kitchen, and I want to review the first book in the Starlore Legacy series called Nova by Chuck Black. It is unabashedly Christian sci-fi, which I love. There are so few Christian sci-fi and Christian fantasy authors out there, and so I'm really excited about what Chuck Black is doing in his, so far, very prolific career. I think he's produced almost 20 books now, maybe more by now, I'm not sure. But the Starlore Legacy is an exciting series, especially for sci-fi lovers. So let me just zoom out for a second and talk about kind of the overall scenery real quick. You may not be aware that there is a vibrant Christian sci-fi and Christian fantasy scene out there, and that's because it's small and it's niche. And for Christians going into the far future or going into other galaxies, it kind of feels like it's a questionable thing. But I love those authors that are brave enough to do it, and Chuck Black is definitely one of them. Let me tell you what I know about Chuck Black. I don't know him, but it sounds like he's had some interesting experiences. He was a fighter pilot, I think an F-16 fighter pilot for part of his Air Force career. He also worked in communications, I think. He's an engineer, apparently now, design engineer of some kind. I just got all this from his bio, but he's a design engineer. He runs a company, and he's written a bunch of Christian sci-fi and fantasy books. First and foremost, he's a believer, and he wants to point people towards Christ, which is cool. But what he's chosen to use to do that in his writing career is sci-fi and fantasy, which I love, because that's kind of that fits with my heart and what I want to see happen within the generation where we live now. And so Chuck Black in this book, let me get to this specific book. So this book is allegorical. But it's not allegorical in the way that a lot of allegory works. So Chuck has a book called Kingdom's Dawn, which we read with our kids, and the kids liked it. But pretty quick, I could tell this is biblical allegory. You know, it kind of rang that bell almost immediately, and you could tell biblical allegory. With Nova, I'm pointing right here, it's this book right here, Nova, in the Starlore series, I was maybe, I don't know, halfway through the book before I realized, hey, I think this might be allegory. And so he hit it much better in the details than he did in Kingdom's Dawn. In this one, it's just kind of little pieces kind of hint that this is allegorical. And so somebody that's not thinking like biblical narrative, I mean, I have a master's degree in theology, so I'm always thinking biblical narrative, but somebody that's not thinking that way could read this and just completely read it as a sci-fi, as a Christian sci-fi. They may not even realize it's Christian at first. Now, I haven't read the next books yet, but I mean, I don't even know if you'd know it was Christian to start out with. If you're a believer and you're familiar with the Bible, you probably would. But that's what I love about this, is that an unbeliever could read it and just enjoy it. A believer can read it and it actually kind of give them some interesting perspectives on faith. Now, one of the things that I really liked about this book was that Chuck, because of his experiences, has extensive knowledge of the aviation industry, and he takes that and he uses that in a sci-fi sense. The characters are like some form of like a starcraft fighter pilots, which is really cool. And so, like, when it goes into them flying around and stuff, the language is very, it suddenly feels like, hey, this guy knows aviation, because like I really don't, but I was drawn into feeling like he knows what he's talking about here. And also, another thing that I really like about Nova is it had a number of concepts that I really like. I mean, I feel like sci-fi is built around this idea of like, we want to discover the world and we want to discover interesting concepts that bring a different perspective to our own mindset. And I think Chuck did that really well. because, I mean, actually, I don't know why, where it comes from for him, but I was looking at his bio thinking, well, he's an engineer, he's a designer, he has patents. Like in the real world, he has patents. So he's a concept guy, and I think he's really strong in concepts. There's a couple of ideas in the book. Gravion particles, I thought was an interesting idea. Omegion radiation, I thought. And I could kind of feel that one coming in the story when you read it, which I hope you will. I kind of felt like, oh, I bet I know what's going on with this. I bet, and then it was kind of like a fun moment when I realized, yeah, I'm thinking along the same lines he is, because he had done a good job of bringing me to that point in the story as a reader to kind of see and get a feel for what was about to happen. So anyway, that was really, all of that was really, really cool. Now, I will say one criticism about the book is, like, if you stacked this up against some of the secular writers who are known for, like, very lyrical or poetic prose, I would say this isn't really in that category, but I don't think it's what Chuck is trying to do. I don't think he's trying to be poetic necessarily. I think he's trying to tell a story for folks that like, I would say, not quite hard sci-fi, but it isn't soft either. I mean, it's closer to hard sci-fi than it is to like, say, Star Wars or whatever. But it also had some fun kind of like Star Wars concepts in it, and so that was cool. So I would say, if you're looking for like a very lyrical kind of book that has a rhythm and a poeticism to it, that's not really what this is. But if you come into this book knowing what it is, I think you'll really enjoy it. I really enjoyed it. Now, I want to say something about the audiobook, because I listened to the audiobook version of this. The audiobook, Chuck Black is, I don't know who produces his audiobooks. The narrators on it, I have to look at their names because, let's see, the narrators were Michael Orenstein and Austina, I mean, maybe Austina or Austin Gray. So the way that the audiobook was set up is the male voice is the main narrator, and he does the male voices, and then he has a female narrator for the female dialogue. I like this style. There was also there's also background music, which was good. It was good quality. And there were sound effects, which were not as good quality. So let me just give you my opinion on audiobooks. I produce audiobooks occasionally, and so I have opinions on it. For me, the premier art form in storytelling is an audiobook, and like an audiobook with a single professional, really great narrator. He did have that in this book. He had really great narrators. These two narrators were super pro. They were really great, really, they're voice actors. They did a great job. When you begin to introduce background music, that works as long as it's sparing. I will say, and it was fairly sparing, but I will say in the book I began to recognize the same audio loop a few times. It wasn't enough to pull me out of the story, but it did clue me into that there was some repetition in the music. A couple of things that did pull me out of the story were actually the sound effects. Now, there's not sound effects all through the audiobook. I don't know how they decided which chapters needed sound effects, but occasionally there would be some sound effects, some sound design in the in the audiobook, and it was kind of jarring because, you're going along and you're just listening, and then suddenly there's sound effects. And the sound effects they used sounded a lower quality than the narration quality. Like maybe they were like 8-bit sound effects or something like that. And so there was this one moment where one character punches another and there's a sound effect for it, and it sounded like, a punch from, the Street Fighter from the 90s or something. It just kind of like, I just sort of was jarred and was like, oh, that was odd. And then I was back into the story. So it's not a deal breaker by any stretch of the imagination, but for me, I'm an audiobook minimalist. I like just a narrator, not really any music, just tell the story as if I'm just sitting listening to somebody reading it. But if you like a more detailed audio production, you may really like this. So it was good. It was nothing wrong with it. but I would say the audio production could use a little bit of an improvement on those points. But the narrators were great, the story was good, and I think it worked really well. So here's my bottom line for Nova by Chuck Black of the Starlore series, or the Starlore Legacy. I want you to check it out because I want us as a group of Christians who also love sci-fi and fantasy, I want us to support sci-fi and fantasy. So buy the book, get the audiobook, you can get it on Amazon, on Kindle. I'll put links in the description of where you're seeing this video so that you can link straight to it and you can get started either reading or listening. You can also find the books that I've written at lucaskitchen.com. All right, thanks for watching.